Welcome to my podcast story, the show where podcasters share the real journey behind their voices, from their first mic check to their biggest milestones. Every episode reveals the lessons, challenges, and breakthrough that shape a podcast star's journey. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I can't wait for you to hear today's story. Tell us your name and what you do.
My name is Branch Isole, and I'm an author and a podcaster.
Yeah. What's the name of your podcast and what's it about?
It's called Patient Zero, and what I do is share information about personal, career, and spiritual relationship growth and sustainability.
Oh, Patient Zero. How old is the podcast?
I'm sorry?
How old is the podcast?
Well, this one is, let's see, I just did my 19th episode this evening. Before this, I had another podcast that ran for just over 2 years. It was 85 episodes.
Wow, 85 episodes. Okay, take it one step at a time. For this podcast we're running currently, we call it Patient Zero. What's the story behind the podcast? The name Patient Zero.
Oh, Patient Zero is each of us is the patient zero of our lifetime journey. And because the content deals with personal and career and spiritual growth, the spiritual part refers to Jesus Christ as patient zero as well.
Okay, can you explain the concept of Patient Zero? Because right now you're speaking English. I understand what patient means. I understand what zero means, but I don't feel like I understand when you combine the two words together.
Okay, well, patient zero generally refers to a point of origin or the first event or first person involved. Most of the time, it deals with pandemics, right? Like the patient zero that they try and discover where it began.
Yeah, I get the idea. Why, like, why did you have to, like, go that deep into Patient Zero? Why? Like, what's the story? Was it a Eureka moment, or was it more like a short list of 50 name ideas and we go for Patient Zero?
No, when I was doing my other podcast, which was called Small Changes, Big Dividends, that one took a while to come up with. I was doing it with a group in New York who was recording and distributing it for me. And so we went through a lot of different names for that podcast. But this one, I just sort of knew out of the gate that it was going to be called Patient Zero because of this idea that we are all a spirit of origination on a life journey. And so it was Patient Zero.
Oh, okay. Patient Zero. When you started the podcast, what were you seeking to do with the podcast?
Well, like I said, the idea is to help listeners grow, help them grow in their personal life, in their career advancement lives, and then in their spiritual relationships. So it's about relationships and it's about growth in all of the things that we do in our daily life, which is, family relationships, work relationships, the personal things that we deal with within ourselves, and then that balance between who we are as a human being and who we are as a spiritual entity, as a spirit.
So far, you mentioned you just did the 19th episode. How has the reception been from listeners?
Well, that's an interesting question because, the fundamental trajectory of my podcast is for truth seekers and truth searchers. And because we live in a world that doesn't want us to see or recognize or embrace truth, my audience is a very particular kind of a listener. People who are sort of at rock bottom or are struggling or face a lot of stress and pressure, struggle in their daily life and in their relationships. So it's for people who are looking for tips and tools and takeaways that they can use in their life right away after any episode airs, that they can use for themselves to address their personal struggle or their work struggle or their relationship struggles.
Oh, I like the way you've fine-tuned the people that are listening to your podcast?
Yeah, it's a very particular group of people. Most podcasts deal with either business success or entrepreneurship
Yeah,
or leadership, real heavy emphasis on basically getting by in life, your career, your job, your goals, your ambitions. And then a lot of other podcasts seem to deal with overcoming adversity or, how I was down and now I'm up and that kind of thing. And
yeah,
my audience is different. My audience is looking for ways to self-improve by embracing truth. And when we embrace truth, we have to look at some hard things in our lives. Because we live in a world that doesn't want us to see or embrace truth, we fall right into line with the world's ways, success and money and possessions and
yeah,
competition and the struggles of life. And the further down that path we go, the more we sometimes discover that, there's something missing in my life. And now we all innately know what's missing, but because we're unaware of it being spiritual growth, and because most people who have been on some kind of a spiritual path have been involved in religions, and religions are not about spirituality. They're about keeping us controlled, thinking that the only way we can have a relationship outside of ourselves with a higher entity than ourselves is to go through the clergy. Well, so I take people down a different path. I take them down a path where they discover for themselves what they're struggling with and, how their relationships can be improved both at home and at work. So it's a little bit different structure, and it's a little bit different audience. So my audience are people who are thinking outside of the box and trying to better understand themselves in their relationships at home and at work. And then once we get a handle on who I am at home and who I am at work, then we can look at that one that's most important, but we have on the back burner of our mind, which is, what about the spiritual me, right? Because we all come here into this life as spirit and soul, and that spirit and soul is combined with body and mind so that we become a total person. But because we are in the world and we embrace the ways of the world, most people often put their spiritual part on the back burner, and they only call upon it, when they get to that point where they're in a hole and they want to get out of the hole. And they want help from somebody who can help them get out of that hole that they've dug. And that's the spiritual part, right? And so it's oftentimes that people get deep in those holes of adversity and they turn to God or, whatever that higher power is for them. But if you don't have a relationship with that higher power, then you don't understand how to communicate with that higher power. And so, because it's outside of ourselves and there's a difficulty in not having any spiritual relationship, because it is a difficult thing to start, most people, fail and go right back to the struggle that they're in, trying to get themselves out of the hole they've dug in the same ways that they did in the past. So it's a repeating of a cycle because they're not familiar with their spiritual self. And for those people who have, been through religions, they can get spiritually fed and have that relationship. But again, religions are a man-made structure, and it has more than one hidden agenda.
Thank you for that, Branch. You mentioned you had a different podcast, small changes, big dividends. I'm curious, why did you sunset that podcast and decide to, pivot to this one you're currently doing?
Well, actually, I enjoyed doing that podcast because it taught me a lot about podcasting, right? And it was a good learning experience. Before that, I had done everything that I had been doing with audiences was live, was in person. But when COVID hit, most of those venues that I was in and presenting to weren't happening. Everything shut down. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go to podcasting. So I went to podcasting as a guest and was a guest on about 200 podcasts. And then a company in New York contacted me and they said, you're talking about something that very few people are talking about. So we'd like you to do a show for us. So we set up the show, did 85 episodes. And then I just decided, I want to go in a different direction. And it just so happens that 2 weeks after I left them, they went out of business. So it was fortuitous for me to make the jump when I did.
Quick break. Before we continue, I'd love to invite you to join the My Podcast Story newsletter. Each week, I share highlights from our guest stories, behind-the-scenes podcasting tips, and resources to help you grow your own show. You can sign up at mypodcaststory.com/join. That is mypodcaststory.com/join. Now, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, now you're doing Patient Zero, and, it's been about 90 episodes. And you just starting, and there's so many things, crazy ideas you already have for the podcast. How have you gotten the word out for the podcast? How have you been telling people about the podcast to get your first sets of listeners?
Well, we have a YouTube channel,
Okay.
which has all of the podcasts. It has both of the podcasts, both the Small Changes, Big Dividends, and now the Patient Zero. It also has much of my writing and selections from my books on there. We use Facebook, we use LinkedIn, we use YouTube, and that's basically our social media platforms that we do all of our promotion and posts.
Oh, okay. So that's on social media, and just posting and showing up consistently, and those trickles of views eventually leads to listeners. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, it leads to the listeners who tune in. Yeah.
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 I'm always curious to see how different podcasts produce their podcast. Let's say you have an idea for an episode, right? The last episode you did. What does it move through from idea to eventually become a published episode that is live for anyone to listen to?
Wow. Well, it's just because I'm a writer, because I'm an author.
Okay.
That's what I do. I take an idea and I develop it along whatever theme I want that particular podcast or that particular story to be about. And because I've been doing it so long, that's how it develops. Like my one tonight that I posted is called Back to the Future.
Yeah.
And it basically is about a spiritual journey that we all have, where we're at in that spiritual place here on earth and what's coming next. And so it's just, I have an idea and I just start to flesh it out. And as a writer, I write out a script and then I edit and edit and edit until I get down to all of the fine points that I want to share with the listener or the reader. And that's how it goes.
You mentioned you write a script. Do you make script points, that's talking points, or do you write word for word scripts that you eventually read word for word on the podcast?
Well, I write word for word scripts, and then I edit those down to the ideas that I want to share. So it's basically an outline.
Okay.
That goes from very much to smaller and smaller until it's down to just a conversational outline with the points that I want to make.
Yeah. Okay. So I get it. You do the brain dump of the full thing, and then eventually you make it concise points, and that helps you. So more like the writing itself, the writing of the scripts helps you to think through what you're going to say, such that when you eventually use those talking points to talk, to talk about the things on the episode, you're not rambling off, because writing those points has helped you thought through, organize the thought, and now you know what you're saying rather than right.
Yeah, it's a plan that then becomes a path, and it allows me to stay on track and not go off on a tangent. But by staying on track, it also allows me to cohesively bring the points together. So it's like a story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
And that way it's easy for the listener to follow. And yet the important points that we're trying to share are easy to understand because they relate to the previous point.
Yeah. Oh, you mentioned from idea you make your outlines, and your outlines you record. Once an episode is recorded, what happens next? You don't handle the editing, or do you have someone doing the editing?
No, I have someone who takes it from there. I just do the stories and the podcast content, and then I have somebody who handles the rest of it for me.
When you say the rest of it, is it just editing, or the edit and also upload and make clips and all those things?
Everything,
Oh,
the editing, the music, the clips, everything is done by one person.
I'm curious, how much are you currently paying for this service?
I don't pay anything for this service.
Well, I see my eyes just opened. Tell me more.
Well, I have a very competent and computer literate, computer savvy wife.
Yeah, I probably should go get a wife that's computer literate, so I have someone doing my editing for me. Wow, wow, that's brilliant. Wow,
Yeah,
yeah,
just truly blessed. She runs my life. I don't have to do anything except show up, write, and record, and everything else is done for me and done professionally. And she's just that kind of person. She's been in computers for decades, and she digs down and drills deep when there's anything new, and if it's something that we can use effectively for the benefit of our listeners, then we'll use it. If it's something that doesn't work for our show or doesn't work for our content, then we can skip over it. It's just that simple. We don't make it complicated. For us, it's real simple. It's real straightforward, and by not getting complicated with it, we don't get in a place where we're trying to juggle too many chainsaws.
yeah. What are some of the apps, softwares, subscriptions you pay for just to, run the podcast behind the scenes?
What do I pay for?
Yeah, for example, Podmatch, right? You pay for Podmatch to be guest. The
Yes.
apps and softwares you pay the podcast expenses.
Yeah, I'm on two different Match. I'm on Matchmaker out of London, and I'm on Podmatch, and that's the only expenses that we have that I can think of.
Okay. Okay. And a question I always ask my guests is, does the podcast make money?
We don't monetize. We're not in it for likes. We're not in it for followers, and we're not in it for money. We're in it to share information of how people can improve their lives and improve their relationships. And if they like what we're doing and they continue to come back, then they get interested in my books and my gifts, my gift merchandise and that kind of thing. So if we make money, it's in the back end. We don't do anything to monetize our podcast.
Okay. Because I'm always curious to see how that plays out. One of the things I've noticed is that certain metrics that are important to me might be vanity metrics for you. And it all depends on the goals and the purpose of you starting the podcast in the first place. So based on the reason why you started the podcast and what you hope out to get out of the podcast, I guess the question I'm asking you now is, define what success would look like for this podcast, Patient Zero.
What sources?
Success. To succeed. Success.
Wow. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have our target audience, like I say, is people who are looking to grow
Yeah.
themselves and in their relationships. So our seed sowing is in that vein.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not going after people. We're inviting people who have the need and the desire to improve their relationships at home and at work to enjoy and listen to what we're sharing. And if it helps them, then we've done our job.
Yeah.
The money comes. It's not a matter of, we're not out there hustling or trying to monetize or make a living. We already have a living provided for us. So
Yeah.
the podcast doesn't have to provide an income. It doesn't have to generate revenue. It only has to generate listeners who then can embrace and use what we're sharing so they can have a better life.
Oh, I like the way you approach the podcast that way. currently, what are some of the exciting projects or plans you have in the pipeline that you're excited to share with me regarding the podcast?
Well, I've got a lot of content.
Okay.
And so the podcast, will live its life for as long as it benefits listeners. And
Yeah.
because it's all we do, I don't have to worry about another job or raising a family. All of that's in my past. So my freedom and my time allows me to put my energies, where we believe that it will serve the most good for the most listeners. So we don't have some of the external pressures and struggles of, having to bring in money and live on. We already have
Yeah.
income from other sources, from our past.
Yeah. Oh, okay, that's really good and exciting. I didn't. You started the podcast. You did a podcast 2 years ago, and eventually you're doing your podcast. So I want us to just split it two ways, and because this one question, but you respond to it from two perspectives. When you said small changes, big dividends, what was the biggest challenge you faced early on with that podcast? And same goes for Patient Zero.
Well, the biggest challenge, obviously, with small changes was I hadn't been in podcasting. So I had to, luckily for me, the group that I was with, again, all I had to do was show up with the content, and they did all the recording and all the editing and, all the distribution. So the
Yeah.
only thing I had to do was get comfortable with the format that they needed done
Yeah.
and to, get my feet under me so that each episode had a flow into the next episode.
Yeah.
And in that particular situation, I also had guests on and, did a conversational interview type of episode with different
Yeah.
guests. The biggest struggle that I had with Patient Zero was getting all of the, I went from an hour show with small changes down to a 15-minute show with
Oh,
Patient Zero.
with interviews or just solo episodes?
No interviews, no.
Okay.
Yeah, don't do any interviews now. I shouldn't say that. I haven't done any. I will invite a guest on if it's the right guest. And,
Okay.
I have guests on who are different, right? Their story or what they're sharing is kind of not the same thing you would hear. Like I had one
Yeah.
guest on who talked about how children should be prepared and how to avoid school shooting scenarios.
Yeah.
And I had another person on who was in a cult at one time. So, my guests are a little bit different than the normal, overcome adversity or be a better entrepreneur or be a better
Yeah.
leader. But I haven't had any guests on yet on Patient Zero. We're real selective with our guests who come on. They have to really have a unique story that will help and benefit our listeners. Like the school shooting was a great guest because he was speaking to parents
Yeah.
about their safety of their children at school when there's a active shooter on campus. So that's the kind of guests that we have on, a little bit different.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Branch.
My pleasure, Wisdom. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for sharing your podcast story. I'm excited to see what you do with those Patient Zero. When you reach 50 episodes, 100 episodes, and so on.
Well, we'll see. If we get to 100, then that'll be a new benchmark.
Yeah. Where can we're talking about the podcast? Where can we listen to the podcast, Patient Zero?
Thank you. Well, it's on YouTube under my YouTube channel, Branch Isole, just my name. It's on Substack, again under my name, my account. It's on Apple and it's on Spotify. All of them are under my name and the title, Patient Zero Branch Isole.
Where can listeners learn more about the work you do and connect with you?
Well, that's easy too. I've got a website, branchisole.com. Has lots of information for readers and listeners. We focus primarily on the website and YouTube for everything that we do. And then, of
Yeah.
course, the podcasts are on
The
those
audio
two
platforms. Yeah.
and Spotify
Spotify,
and
Apple.
Apple.
Oh. The website once again is Branch Isole. That's Branch Isole, Branch Isole. I'll put the link in the description and the show notes, so listeners can just click and go directly to the sites mentioned.
Great. Thank you, Wisdom. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you. That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I hope you enjoyed listening to this journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show. And don't forget to join the newsletter at mypodcaststory.com/join for more stories and podcasting insights. Until next time, keep telling your story because someone out there needs to hear it.